In 1839, Harrow Plantation made a choice it believed would end a problem once and for all. They bound Isaiah Crow, an enslaved carpenter accused of destroying a fortune in property, and locked him inside a stone cellar to await a public execution. The plantation owner called him the most dangerous slave alive, not because he carried a weapon, but because he understood the workings of the plantation better than the men who claimed ownership. They postponed the hanging, certain the walls would contain him and that fear would spread. By the time the officials returned to prepare the noose, Harrow Plantation had vanished. The enslaved quarters were deserted, the ledgers had disappeared, the main house was collapsing into ruin, and Isaiah Crow was nowhere inside the cell meant to end his life. How did the man they thought powerless turn their confidence into destruction? Before moving forward, comment on where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one that cannot be missed. Dawn arrived over Harrow Plantation like a slow, sharp blade. The sky glowed red and gold through the tall pines, casting long shadows across the quarters, where the enslaved still slept in the fleeting quiet before the bell rang. In the carpenter's shed at the edge of the property, Isaiah Crow was already awake. He sat on a low stool, fingers tracing a piece of hickory he had been shaping for 3 days. His hands moved with the deliberate care they always carried. No wasted motion, no rush. At 43, Isaiah's body carried decades of labor. His shoulders were rounded from constant work, his knuckles thick from years handling wood and iron, a scar cutting pale through the dark skin above his left eye. Gray streaked his hair at the temples, his face showed no emotion. The door suddenly burst inward. Caleb Moore filled the frame, breathing heavily as though he had sprinted from the main house. Behind him were 2 patrollers, white men with clubs and pistols, their faces flushed with the distinct excitement that comes from permitted cruelty. Moore was younger than Isaiah by about 15 years, lean and cruel-looking, with pale eyes that never seemed to focus quite right. He had been overseer for 2 years, promoted after the last one drank himself to death. "Get up," Moore said. Isaiah put down the hickory. He rose slowly, keeping his hands visible, moving with care, with precise, efficient motion. He did not speak. I said, "Get up faster when I'm talking to you." Moore stepped closer, hand on the whip at his belt. "You hear me, Isaiah?" "I hear you," Isaiah replied, his voice low and even, almost gentle. It was the same tone he used for every occasion: instruction, refusal, prayer. The consistency unsettled people. They couldn't read his thoughts. "You're coming with us." Isaiah nodded once. He asked no questions. Questions could be dangerous, and silence was a tool he had learned to wield with exactness. One of the patrollers moved behind him with iron chains. The metal was cold against his wrists. The man fastened the shackles tight enough to bite. "Walk," Moore commanded. They led him out into the pale morning light. The quarters were stirring, people emerging from their cabins, curious about the commotion. Isaiah kept his eyes forward, but he could feel their gaze. He sensed the questions forming on lips that knew better than to speak aloud. At the main house, Edmund Harrow waited on the veranda. A tall, thin man shaped by comfort rather than real hunger. He wore a gray morning coat despite the heat pressing down like a damp hand. His face was sharp, colorless, rigid, holding the posture of someone who thought suffering was purely moral. Behind the house, the stable yard was a scene of chaos. 3 horses lay dead in their stalls, already bloated in the humid air. Harrow's pride, thoroughbreds brought from Charleston, worth more than 10 men combined. Their tongues had gone black, foam crusted their muzzles. "Poison," Harrow said, not looking at Isaiah. He addressed Moore as though Isaiah were part of the furniture. "Oleander in the feed. Planned?" "Deliberate, yes, sir," Moore said. "And we found the one responsible." "Yes, sir," Moore confirmed. Harrow turned to Isaiah, inspecting him like livestock. "Isaiah Crow, the most dangerous slave on this land." Isaiah said nothing. "You know why I call you that?" Harrow asked, stepping closer. "Not because you are violent. You've never raised your hand to anyone, have you?" Isaiah stayed silent. "No, you are dangerous because you think. I see it in the way you watch, the way you remember. You're too clever for your own good, and that is something I cannot allow." Other enslaved workers had gathered, keeping their distance. They stood in small groups, heads lowered, pretending not to hear but absorbing every word. Isaiah saw old Ben among them, the preacher who led Sunday gatherings by the creek. Ben's face was carefully blank, but his hands trembled as they held his hat. "I don't need your confession," Harrow said. "The proof is clear. Those horses didn't poison themselves. You had access to the feed. You had motive. I've watched you for months, seen that look in your eyes. You think you can outsmart your place in the world." More men stepped forward. "Shall I get the others to testify, sir? Some of them must have seen something." Harrow waved his hand. "Round up whoever you need, but do it quickly. I want this settled before the sun climbs too high." 3 men were brought from the quarters, terrified, their compliance only from the implicit threat of Isaiah's fate. They answered simply, carefully, neither condemning nor defending him. Their words were shaped by survival. "There," Harrow said when the interrogation ended. "Witness is enough." Isaiah had spoken not a single word in his defense. He had offered no explanation, no denial. His silence was read as intended arrogance, admission, proof of guilt. "Chain him," Harrow ordered. "Keep him secured below until we arrange the execution." They led him past the quarters again. This time, Sarah Crow stood at the doorway of their cabin, the one they had shared for 18 years. She was small, dark-skinned, strong-backed, hand-scarred from years in the kitchen. Her face showed nothing. She did not cry. She did not speak, but her eyes met Isaiah's for a moment, conveying everything that could not be said aloud: fear, grief, understanding, and something else, trust. Old Ben bowed his head, lips moving in silent prayer. The others watched quietly, knowing witnessing was required, but participation optional. Isaiah was taken to the stone meat cellar beneath the main house, a low building built into the hillside, cool and dark even in summer. The heavy oak door, reinforced with iron, was unlocked by Moore, who motioned for the patrollers to throw Isaiah inside. The cell was roughly 8 feet square. The walls were cut limestone, the floor packed earth. There was no window. A single bucket rested in the corner. 3 days, Moore said, standing at the doorway. "Then we hang you in front of everyone. Make an example." The door slammed, locking with a heavy click. Darkness swallowed him. Isaiah stood still, letting his eyes adjust. Gradually, he traced the texture of the stone, the exact shape of the room, its dimensions. His hands reached out to the walls, feeling the mortar where it was thin, the joints deliberately weak. He remembered this work. He had built this cellar 12 years ago under a different overseer. Pressing his palm against the cool stone, he felt certain this was exactly where he needed to be. The darkness was complete at first. Isaiah stood motionless, chains heavy on his wrists, letting silence settle around him like water. Slowly, shadows revealed the room's shape, the curve of the ceiling, the rough walls, the faint line where the door met its frame. The air was damp and cool, thick with the smell of limestone and earth. Moisture beaded on the stones. Drips marked the passing of time. His breath formed small clouds. Above, the plantation carried on. Footsteps crossed the floor overhead, servants moving, furniture scraping, voices too faint to understand. Isaiah had built this cellar, measured the wall thickness, calculated how much sound would carry. He moved to a corner and sat back against the stone. The chains rattled softly with each movement. The cuffs chafed his wrists, but he ignored it. Pain was just information. He closed his eyes and listened, cataloging every pattern of the house above. Hours passed. The door changed from gray to gold to shadow as the sun slowly crossed the sky and finally disappeared below the horizon. Isaiah stayed still, saving his energy, thinking carefully about every step that had to happen next. In the grand dining room of the big house, Edmund Harrow sat at the head of a long mahogany table. Dinner was spread out before him. Roasted duck, rice with gravy, greens cooked tender with fat back, and cornbread still warm from the oven. Caleb Moore sat to his right, wearing his finest shirt for the occasion. At the far end sat Magistrate Theodore Blanchard, a heavy man whose jowls wobbled when he chewed. 3 days, Harrow said, slicing his duck with careful precision. "I want every slave on this plantation and the neighboring ones to see what happens when order is broken." Blanchard nodded, wiping grease from his chin with a linen napkin. "A public hanging sends the right message. These people need constant reminders of their place." "Exactly," Harrow said, putting down his knife and fork, barely touching his plate. He rarely ate much at supper. This man Isaiah, he's been a problem for years. Too smart, too calm. Other slaves look up to him even when he isn't speaking. That kind of influence is more dangerous than open rebellion. Moore leaned forward. He built half the buildings on this property, sir. Knows every structure inside and out. If he wanted real damage, he could have done far worse than killing horses, which is exactly why we must act swiftly, Harrow said. Before he could continue, Blanchard reached for his wine glass. I'll sign the order tonight. Execution by hanging. 3 days from now at dawn. We'll put the scaffold in the main yard where everyone can see. Make it public record. Harrow added, I want the other plantations to know we do not tolerate disobedience in any form. Consider it done. Blanchard raised his glass. To proper order and swift justice. They drank. Outside the dining room windows, darkness had fully fallen over the plantation. In the quarters, people moved quietly through their evening tasks, sensing that something fundamental had shifted, though they did not yet know what it meant. Old Ben arrived at the cellar door just as night fully fell, carrying a tin plate with cornbread and a cup of water. The guard unlocked the door and stepped back, letting the old man descend the 3 stone steps into the cellar. 5 minutes, the guard said from above. No longer. Ben's eyes took a moment to adjust. When he finally made out Isaiah's figure in the corner, he moved carefully forward and knelt, setting down the plate and cup. His joints groaned with the motion. He was past 70 now, his beard completely white, his hands twisted from decades of fieldwork before age had given him lighter duties. Brought you some food, Ben said softly. Isaiah reached for the cup first, drinking slowly. The water was cool and clean. He set it down and tore off a piece of cornbread, but did not eat right away. They say 3 days, Ben whispered. Dawn hanging public. Isaiah nodded, expression unreadable. Want me to pray with you? Not yet. Isaiah's voice was low. Tell me something first. The guards, they rotate every 6 hours. Ben looked puzzled. I think so. Why do you ask? And the door hinges. I installed them 12 years ago. Oiled them regularly since then. Nobody oils anything down here, Ben said. This cellar doesn't get used, except for storage now and then. He paused, watching Isaiah's face in the dim light. Brother, you need to make peace with what's coming. No point in the mortar between these stones. Isaiah interrupted gently. Do you remember when they had it repaired? Was that 8 years ago or 9? Ben's face shifted, sadness creeping in. He thought Isaiah's mind was breaking under the weight of what awaited, clinging to minor details to avoid the truth of death. Never been repaired. Good. Isaiah finally ate a piece of cornbread, chewing slowly. That's good to know. You need to turn your thoughts to the Lord, Ben urged. Get right with your soul before I am right, Isaiah said, tone steady and certain. Tell Sarah I am at peace. Tell her I know exactly what I am doing. Ben did not fully understand, but he nodded. The guard called down that time was up. The old man rose stiffly, leaving the plate and cup, and climbed the steps. The door shut behind him, lock turning. Isaiah sat in complete darkness again, his mind running through calculations and timing. Near midnight, new sounds reached the cellar. Isaiah heard boots on the floor above, then someone descending the stairs of the main house. The front door opened and closed. Minutes later, the cellar door unlocked again. Sheriff Amos Ridley appeared, holding a lantern framed in the doorway. He was a compact man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a permanent expression of careful calculation. 2 deputies followed him. Bring him up, Ridley said. They pulled Isaiah to his feet, marched him out of the cellar, through the kitchen, and into Harrow's study. The plantation owner looked furious. Moore stood beside him, equally angry. This is highly irregular, Harrow said. It's the law, Ridley replied. Property worth over $500 requires parish investigation before execution. Those horses were $800 each by your accounting. We have witnesses, but you've coursed testimony from terrified slaves. I must conduct proper questioning. The prisoner will be held in parish custody until the investigation is complete. For how long? Until further notice. Harrow's jaw tightened. This is outrageous. File a complaint with the governor if you like. Ridley gestured to his deputies. Take him to the wagon. They led Isaiah out into the night. Word spread quickly through the quarters. People stepped from their cabins to watch the sheriff's wagon move away. Sarah stood in her doorway, hand pressed to her mouth. Old Ben whispered prayers of gratitude. Isaiah sat in the wagon bed, expression calm as deputies flanked him. Inside, however, he felt the first piece fall into place. Back in the now empty cellar, the guards remained stationed outside. Isaiah could hear them arguing through the heavy door from his new cell in the parish jail. "West of time," one guard muttered. "Sheriff's got no spine," the other agreed. "They'll probably delay it for weeks now." In his new cell, Isaiah lay on the narrow cot, allowing himself the smallest smile. The delay meant everything. It meant time. It meant the plantation's attention would scatter. It meant the guards would grow careless. It meant the plan could continue exactly as he intended. He closed his eyes and began counting hours until the next phase. The parish jail was quieter than the cellar had been. Isaiah lay on the cot, eyes open, noting the subtle shifts in temperature and sound. The deputy in the front office snored. Somewhere, a clock ticked steadily. Outside, the world held its breath in that deep stillness that comes only just before dawn. Isaiah had been in the jail less than 3 hours. He sat up slowly, chains clinking softly. The wrist restraints were standard issue, strong enough for an ordinary prisoner. But Isaiah had spent 20 years working with metal, wood, and stone. He knew how things were built and how they failed. He reached beneath the thin mattress where he had hidden a small shard of iron during the brief moment the deputies turned to lock the door. It was no longer than his palm, sharp and strong. Isaiah worked the shard into the lock of his left wrist chain, pressing at the exact angle for the catch to release. He moved deliberately, without haste. The first lock clicked after 4 minutes. The second took 3. He set the chains on the cot and listened. The deputy's snoring continued undisturbed. The cell door was newer than the restraints but built by the lowest bidder. Isaiah traced the hinges in near darkness and found what he expected. The bottom hinge had screws instead of rivets, cheaper, weaker, easier to remove. Using the iron shard as a tool, he worked the screws loose. The pine wood was soft, worn smooth by moisture. Once he got a good grip, he removed 3 screws from the bottom hinge, then 2 from the middle, enough to create slight movement so he could lift the door from its frame silently. Isaiah eased it open 6 inches and slipped through. The deputy slept on, chair tilted back against the wall, rifle nearby. Isaiah moved like a shadow, taking nothing, disturbing nothing. He reached the back door and found it barred with a simple plank. He lifted it carefully, stepping into the cool pre-dawn air. The parish jail stood at the edge of town. Between it and Harrow Plantation lay 4 miles of road and forest. Isaiah knew every inch. He had walked these paths countless times, carrying tools and building structures for men who never thought he would turn his knowledge against them. He moved through the darkness with certainty, following paths invisible to anyone who had not spent decades memorizing every detail of the land. The plantation seemed peaceful when he neared its edges. No lights in the big house. The quarters were silent. Only the animals shifted in their pens, sensing something amiss. Isaiah circled to the rear of the main house, where the old cellar entrance waited. The guards had been reassigned after his transfer. Saying he had questions about the fire. They led Isaiah back to the interrogation room. Warren sat at the table, papers spread out before him, insurance forms, property surveys, preliminary damage notes. He peered at Isaiah over thin wire spectacles. "You built the main house," Warren said. "Part of it," Isaiah replied. "I did some carpentry work. So you knew how it was built, its weak points." "I knew its construction. And the cellar door, you got out because it failed. The door gave way." "Yes, convenient timing." Isaiah stayed silent. Warren shuffled his papers. The fire began in several places at once: the storage area, the kitchen, the overseer's quarters. Witnesses claimed to see flames in all 3 locations before anyone could respond. "That seems like poor fire safety," Isaiah remarked. "Or arson," Warren said sharply. "An examiner could tell the difference." "You're suggesting it was an accident." "I'm suggesting that anyone who keeps lamp oil next to grain and paper might reconsider how they store things," Isaiah said. "But I'm not the examiner." Ridley leaned closer. "Where were the others?" "The people in the quarters." "I don't know. I was in the cellar. Then I walked toward the road. The quarters were empty when the overseers checked. Maybe they ran when the fire started. Before anyone raised the alarm. Fear makes people move fast." Lowe's pen scratched furiously. Warren gathered his documents with quick, sharp motions. Ridley stood, chair scraping. "This isn't over?" Ridley said. "I didn't think it was." Isaiah replied. They took him back to his cell as the afternoon sun pressed over the town. Isaiah lay on the bench and listened to voices outside discussing execution schedules and proper procedures. He heard the word rebellion repeated until it became meaningless. As dusk darkened the cell, Isaiah ran his fingers along the stone wall near the floor. He found a loose patch of mortar and worked it free, exposing a small brick beneath. Using it, he carved a single vertical line into the softer stone. Not counting days, but counting patience, measuring how long before fear forced action, before procedure collapsed under pressure, before the system revealed how fragile it really was. Morning came with the rattle of keys down the hall. Isaiah opened his eyes to dim light through the high window. He had slept lightly, waking often to voices in the street, men arguing about justice and property, about law and example. Now the voices faded, replaced by ordinary sounds of the town stirring. The cell door opened. Pike stood there with a tin plate and cup of water. He placed them on the floor inside the cell without stepping over the threshold. "Eat," Pike said flatly. "The sheriff wants you presentable." Isaiah sat slowly. His body ached from the wooden bench and the stress he'd been holding in check. He picked up the plate. Cornmeal mush. A slice of salt pork, bread so hard it seemed baked days ago. He ate carefully, aware of Pike at the doorway. "You got a name in the papers," Pike said after a long pause. Isaiah stopped mid-bite. He looked up. Pike showed no expression. "Careers brought newspapers from New Orleans. You're famous." "Famous," Isaiah repeated quietly. "Dangerous slave burns plantation. That's the headline." Pike shifted. "The sheriff isn't happy. Says it makes things complicated." Isaiah continued eating slowly, thinking through the implications. News traveled faster than he expected, faster than officials could control. Pike collected the empty plate and cup. "You'll have visitors today." Legal types, sheriff's orders. He locked the cell and left without another word. Isaiah moved to the window. Standing on the bench and gripping the bars, he could see a sliver of street below. Wagons passed. White men clustered, gesturing urgently. A newsboy called out headlines he couldn't hear clearly. The system was reacting, that was certain. They came for him mid-morning. Ridley, Lowe, and 2 men Isaiah hadn't seen. One wore fine clothing and carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. The other was younger, simpler, with ink-stained fingers. The interrogation room felt smaller with 5 people inside. Ridley motioned for Isaiah to sit. The well-dressed man stayed standing. "This is Attorney Clayton Marsh," Ridley said, representing several parish landowners. "He has questions." Marsh studied Isaiah carefully, the way one studies livestock at auction. "You know your situation has drawn attention, I've heard," Isaiah said. "Newspapers as far as Baton Rouge printed your name. Abolitionist papers in the North call you a hero." Marsh's tone carried distaste at the word. "That complicates things." "How so?" "Public executions make martyrs," Marsh said bluntly, "which serves no one." "Not ours, not yours." Isaiah said nothing. He had learned that silence often revealed more than speech. "The displaced families from Harrow Plantation," Ridley interjected. 23 people total. "They need placement." "Quick sale south would resolve that," Marsh said. "Quick sale causes panic," Ridley argued. "Other plantations are already nervous. Send people south quickly and you'll have runners all the way to Arkansas." The younger man spoke for the first time. "There's the matter of testimony. The county examiner needs a formal statement about the fire's origin." "Statements already given," Ridley said. "A detailed one," the man clarified. "Something for insurance adjusters." They question whether claims can be honored under the circumstances. All eyes turned to Isaiah. He met them steadily. "I can describe the building's construction storage practices, the lack of proper fire breaks. That shows negligence," Lowe observed quietly. "Negligence we can work with," Marsh said. "Arson and rebellion we cannot." Ridley leaned forward, elbows on the table. "If we relocate the families locally instead of selling south, does that calm things?" "Depends on who testifies," Marsh said. He looked at Isaiah. "You claim the fire was accidental. Poor construction, poor safety, nothing deliberate." "I can't say how it started," Isaiah said carefully. "I can speak only to weaknesses and the escape. Door failed. I walked out. Nothing more." Marsh turned to Ridley. "Local placement could work. Spread them across 3 or 4 properties. No families split. Work contracts instead of immediate sale. Looks like mercy prevents panic." "And him?" Ridley gestured at Isaiah. "Held pending examiner's final report, then quiet transfer, no public display." The younger man scribbled notes fast. Isaiah watched the negotiation with calm precision, like watching chess pieces move. They weren't talking about him now. They were talking about problems, solutions, stability, control. "I need names," the examiner's assistant said, "of displaced families for placement records." "I can provide them," Isaiah said. Everyone looked at him again. "You know all their names?" Lowe asked. "I know all who lived in the quarters, their skills, their families." Isaiah paused deliberately. "That information helps with proper placement." Silence filled the room. Marsh's eyes narrowed. Ridley's jaw tightened. They understood what Isaiah offered. Cooperation benefiting them while keeping families intact. "Write them down," Ridley said finally. "Every name, every skill. We'll review placements with you before finalizing." Isaiah nodded slightly. Of course, they gave him paper and pen that afternoon. Isaiah sat in his cell, materials on the bench, writing carefully. 23 names, 23 lives he could guide with precision rather than chance. Pike brought dinner as the sun sank. "The sheriff says you're cooperative." "Sheriff would be right," Isaiah said without looking up. "Heard they're keeping families together." "That true?" "That's the agreement." Pike paused, silent. "Never seen anyone negotiate from inside a cell before." Isaiah set down his pen. "I'm not negotiating. I'm giving needed information." "Looks like negotiating to me." "Perhaps," Isaiah said softly. "We see things differently." Pike left the door open while Isaiah finished writing. Small gesture but meaningful. Slight easing of constant vigilance. Isaiah noted it and kept documenting carefully. By late afternoon, Ridley returned with Marsh and the examiner's assistant. They reviewed Isaiah's list, asked questions, discussed placement options. Isaiah answered steadily as he had since surrendering himself days before. "This works," Marsh said finally. "Families stay intact. Properties get skilled labor. Everything seems reasonable." "And insurance claims?" Ridley asked. "Negligence ruling solves that." Examiners satisfied. Marsh gathered papers. "Execute quietly and avoid bigger problems." They left as dusk fell. Isaiah returned to his cell aware that something unusual had happened. He had shaped outcomes from confinement. He had used fear of disorder to create fragments of mercy in a merciless system. Night fell slowly. Isaiah lay on the cool stone floor. Through the high window he could hear the town settling into evening routines. Somewhere in the punctuation distance, church bells tolled 7 times. He closed his eyes and allowed himself something he hadn't permitted in many years. A fleeting moment of belief that the impossible might really be possible. That systems built on absolute power could be shifted with leverage and patience. That control did not always demand freedom. The bells gradually faded into silence. Isaiah inhaled slowly, evenly, letting the tension ease from his shoulders. For the first time since the fire, he let himself imagine that his plan could actually succeed. The night deepened all around him. He did not move. He simply lay there, listening to the quiet, feeling the hard stone beneath him, believing. Morning arrived with the sound of boots striking stone stairs. Isaiah opened his eyes and sat upright, already fully awake before Pike appeared. But the jailer was not alone. A young man followed behind him, no older than 20, thin with nervous hands that kept fidgeting with his worn jacket. His skin marked him instantly as someone living in the fragile space between bondage and conditional freedom. "This is Eli Turner," Pike said. "He'll be helping with duties while I handle courthouse business." Eli carried a tray of breakfast, better than usual. Real eggs, bacon still warm, bread that looked fresh. He set it carefully on the cell floor, barely meeting Isaiah's gaze. "He's working off his contract," Pike continued. "Sheriff hired him for jail maintenance. You give him any trouble, he reports directly to me. Understand?" "Understood," Isaiah replied. Pike left them alone. Eli stood awkwardly near the cell door, watching Isaiah eat. "You're the one they're writing about," Eli said finally. Isaiah chewed slowly before answering. "So they say people are scared. White folks, I mean. Talking about uprisings all over. Patrols doubled on every plantation within 20 miles. What you?" Isaiah asked. "What if I blinked?" "What do you mean?" "Scared, hopeful, angry. What are you?" The young man's hands flexed at his sides. "I'm trying to get free. That's what I am. Sheriff promised me papers when my years are up if I do good work." Isaiah set down the tin plate. "Years a long time. Better than forever, maybe," he said quietly. Eli shifted his weight, glancing toward the stairs. "I'm supposed to ask if you need anything. Writing materials, clean water, extra blanket, sheriff's orders. Why? Why the improved treatment?" Eli looked uncomfortable. "You helped with those families, getting them placed properly instead of sold off. People noticed." Isaiah stood and moved closer to the bars. He instinctively took a small step back. "Who noticed?" Isaiah asked. "Officials," Eli said. "The ones making decisions." "And others?" "What others?" Eli looked again toward the stairs, uneasy. "People who want this handled quietly. No more headlines. No attention from up north." Isaiah studied the young man's face carefully. Fear lived there, yes, but also something else. Desperation for approval, for safety, for the promise of papers that might never come. "I need fresh paper," Isaiah said, "and a pen with good ink. I'm preparing a statement for the examiner." "I can get that," Eli said quickly. "Anything else? Privacy to write it?" Eli nodded and left, taking the breakfast tray with him. Isaiah listened to his footsteps fade up the stairs, counting the rhythm, sensing the young man's nervousness in the speed of his retreat. Eli returned an hour later with quality paper and a steel nib pen. He also brought a message. "Sheriff Ridley wants your full testimony about the fire by tomorrow morning," Eli said. "Detailed account. Building construction, storage practices, everything that made it unsafe." "And if I provide that?" Isaiah asked. "It helps everybody," Eli said. "Insurance companies get answers. Families get proper placement. Things calm down." Isaiah took the writing materials. "Tell him I'll have it ready." Eli hesitated in the doorway. "They're being decent about this. More decent than usual, I mean." "That's something," Isaiah said. "That's something." The young man left again. Isaiah sat with the paper spread before him, thinking carefully about what he would write. The statement had to serve many purposes: satisfy officials while protecting the families who had escaped, create a record usable later if needed, and show patterns of negligence without directly accusing anyone. He began writing in clear script. He detailed the cellar's construction from years earlier, noting weaknesses in the structures. He described storage buildings, their closeness to oil reserves, the dry wood construction, the lack of fire breaks. He listed safety violations he had seen but never been allowed to correct. Everything he wrote was true. Everything he wrote was also incomplete. By late afternoon he had filled 4 pages with careful testimony. Pike came down briefly to check on him, saw him writing, and left without comment. As evening approached, Eli returned with dinner. "Statement finished?" the young man asked. "Nearly," Isaiah replied. Eli set down the tray. "Stew, cornbread, even a small piece of dried apple. They're treating you better than most." "They're treating me carefully," Isaiah corrected. "There's a difference. Could be worse," Eli said. Isaiah looked at him. "Could it? Mercy built on convenience vanishes the moment it's inconvenient. They gave their word about the families." "Yes, they did," Eli admitted. Isaiah returned to writing. "Words are binding until they're not." Eli stayed silent for a long moment, clearly wanting to argue but lacking the certainty. Finally he collected the breakfast tray and left Isaiah alone. Night settled over the parish jail. Isaiah finished his statement as lamplight faded through the window. He read it twice, checking for anything that could endanger the families while meeting official requirements. Satisfied, he set the pages aside and lay down on the wooden bench. His body ached still, but differently, less from physical restraint, more from tension held invisible. Sleep came in fragments. Just before dawn, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Eli appeared, carrying a lamp, looking exhausted. "Sheriff wants the statement first thing," Eli said quietly. Isaiah sat up and handed over the pages. "It's ready." Eli took them carefully, as if handling something fragile. He glanced at the neat handwriting, the ordered paragraphs, the careful documentation. "You write better than most white men I've seen," Eli said. "Dangerous skill," Isaiah replied. "Yeah," Eli said, folding the papers. "That's what they say. They're going to ask me questions about you. What you're like, what you talk about, whether you seem to be planning something. What will you tell them?" "I'll tell them the truth. That you've been cooperative. That you're helping with everything they ask. That's all? What else is there?" "Nothing else. Just what they ask." Eli lingered in the doorway for several heartbeats longer, breathing audibly. Then he left, climbing the stairs slowly, his steps uneven and hesitant. Morning came in full light. Isaiah heard courthouse doors opening across the square, the town beginning its daily routines. He imagined Eli Turner walking toward the building, holding testimony that could shape outcomes the young man likely did not fully understand. He imagined officials reading his statement, discussing his cooperation, making decisions based on fear disguised as mercy. He imagined Eli being pulled aside, questioned carefully, offered promises of freedom papers in exchange for seemingly harmless information. He imagined the young man's desperate need to believe. Isaiah closed his eyes and waited. The morning stretched ahead, full of possibilities he could not control. All he could do was trust that his careful words would serve their purpose, and that Eli Turner's hope would not become another tool for the system to wield. Across the square, Eli Turner stood outside the courthouse door. The sun climbed higher, warming the morning air. Inside he could hear official voices, the kind that held power over life and freedom. He looked down at the folded papers in his hands. Isaiah's testimony, truth carefully shaped to protect people Eli would never meet. Sheriff Ridley had promised him freedom papers, 1 year of good work, no trouble, complete cooperation. Then he could leave. Then he could be his own person, make his own choices, live without constantly checking over his shoulder. All he had to do was answer honestly, tell them what he observed, help them understand the man in the cell below, simple, clear, the path to everything he wanted. Eli's hand touched the door handle. He could hear his breathing loud in his ears. His fingers trembled slightly. Inside they were waiting. Outside the morning continued, wagons rolling past, people walking about, the world moving forward. Frozen between wanting and knowing, between survival and something unnamed, he held the door handle cold in his palm. The courtroom filled slowly that morning. Isaiah heard the gathering from the holding cell beneath the courthouse, boots on floorboards, chairs scraping, low conversations echoing through the vents. He had been moved before dawn, transferred without explanation, shackled to an iron ring in the stone wall. Sheriff Ridley appeared at the cell door just after sunrise. His expression was careful, controlled, revealing nothing. "You're being brought up for examination," Ridley spoke. "The county prosecutor wants clarity on your statement." Isaiah stood as much as the chains would allow. Clarity about what? Specifics. Ridley opened the cell but left the shackles in place. Questions about motive. "The examiner wants to determine whether the fire was accidental, careless, or intentionally set." "My statement was clear." "Your statement was cautious," Ridley corrected him. "Too cautious, some think." 2 deputies appeared behind the sheriff. They flanked Isaiah as he was led up the narrow stairs into the main courthouse. The building smelled of tobacco smoke and old paper. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting dust that floated in the air. The courtroom was smaller than Isaiah expected, 20 chairs arranged in rows, a raised platform for the examiner, a witness stand facing both officials and observers. Most of the seats were filled with white men, planters he recognized, local merchants, a few strangers who carried themselves with the rigid certainty of men used to being obeyed. Isaiah stood beside the platform, still shackled, standing instead of sitting. The message was clear. He was not a defendant deserving the respect of process. He was evidence to be studied. Examiner Horace Dalton entered from a side door, mid-50s, gray-haired, wearing spectacles that caught the light as he organized papers on his desk. He did not look at Isaiah. "This inquiry concerns the incident at Harrow Plantation," Dalton announced, determining whether the destruction counts as criminal negligence or deliberate rebellion. The word hung in the air like smoke. Rebellion, not arson, not merely crime, a legal term that carried death without appeal. "We will hear testimony," Dalton continued, "from those who directly observed the accused behavior, statements, and intentions." Isaiah's jaw tightened slightly. The hearing was already decided. They were not seeking truth, they were shaping justification. The first witness was Overseer Caleb Moore, the surviving representative from Harrow Plantation. He testified about Isaiah's silence, his refusal to show proper respect, his knowledge of plantation structures. Everything Moore said was factually true. Everything Moore said was meant to sound threatening. "Did the accused ever make threats?" Dalton asked. "Not directly," Moore admitted, "but he had a way of looking at you as if measuring, calculating." "Calculating what?" "Weaknesses, opportunities, ways to cause the most damage." Isaiah stayed still, expression neutral. Denying it would only confirm it. Silence was his only defense, and it was not enough. The second witness was Thomas Pike, the jailer. Pike testified about Isaiah's conduct in custody. Cooperative but unnaturally calm, too articulate for an enslaved man, too comfortable with writing. "Did he seem remorseful?" Dalton asked. Pike hesitated. "No, sir. He seemed satisfied. Satisfied with the destruction. Satisfied with something. Cannot say exactly what," the room murmured. Isaiah understood. They were building a story where his calmness became proof of guilt. His intelligence became evidence of conspiracy. His very existence was a threat. Then Ellie Turner was called. The young man entered from the back, walking slowly to the witness stand. He did not look at Isaiah. His hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the railing. "State your name and position," Dalton instructed. "Lee Turner, assistant at the parish jail. You had regular contact with the accused during his imprisonment." "Yes, sir." "Describe his behavior." Eli swallowed, visibly quiet, mostly keeping to himself. "Did he say anything about the fire?" "Some." When asked, Dalton leaned forward slightly. "What did he say?" Eli's eyes flicked toward Isaiah for a moment, then away. His voice dropped. "He said it was necessary." The room went silent. "Necessary," Dalton repeated. "In what sense?" I asked him why. "Why set the plantation on fire?" He said it was necessary to show them. "Show who?" "White men, owners, people in authority." Eli spoke faster now, as if his words could not be stopped. "He said one fire wasn't enough, it needed to spread. More plantations must burn before anything changes." Isaiah's chest tightened. Every word was false. Every word sounded believable. "Did he give specific targets?" Dalton pressed. He talked about other properties, about how many enslaved people worked there, which ones had the most to lose. Eli gripped the railing. "He said he had lists, names of people who would assist, plans for coordinated action, coordinated rebellion." "Yes, sir." The murmuring in the room grew. Dalton raised a hand for silence. "Are you certain of this?" Eli nodded, still not looking at Isaiah. "I am certain." "And you reported this to Sheriff Ridley?" "As soon as I heard it, sir." Dalton wrote notes on his papers. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. You have done your duty." Eli stepped down, walking quickly toward the exit. As he passed, Isaiah caught his eye for a brief second. What he saw was not anger, it was terror and shame mixed together, inseparable. The young man disappeared through the door. Dalton addressed the room. "Given this testimony, I am classifying Isaiah Crow as an extraordinary threat to public order. The evidence points to not isolated crime but premeditated conspiracy toward widespread rebellion." He signed a document carefully. "The accused is remanded to solitary confinement pending executive review of sentencing." No trial mentioned, no defense considered. The examination was over. Isaiah was led back down the stairs by 4 deputies instead of 2. They moved him past the holding cell to a deeper chamber in the courthouse foundation. This cell had no window. The door was iron, not wood. The only sound was water dripping somewhere in the dark. They locked him inside without speaking. Afternoon faded into evening. Isaiah sat on the stone floor back against the wall, listening to the empty building above as officials left for the day. He heard boots, voices, doors closing, then silence. He had misjudged not Eli specifically, but the system's willingness to build any narrative it needed. Truth was irrelevant when fear demanded action. Night fell completely. No lamp, no candle. Darkness wrapped around him like water. Then he heard it. Chains scraping across stone somewhere beyond his cell. Heavy links, slow, deliberate. The sound drew closer, moved past his door, down a corridor he could not see. Then it stopped. Silence deeper than before. Isaiah closed his eyes, though it changed nothing in the dark. His careful planning, patience, and belief that he could use the system's own methods against it all collapsed under one terrified young man's testimony. The power he had accumulated vanished like smoke. He was alone in darkness, waiting for whatever came next, with no tools except the certainty that he had no moves left. The chains began dragging again, closer now, right outside his door. Then they stopped and waited. Isaiah stayed completely still, listening. Whatever caused that sound, guard, intimidation, or something else, had paused just beyond his door. He counted his breaths. 20, 30. Silence stretched, unbroken. Then footsteps receded, fading upward through the courthouse foundation. He was alone again. Isaiah shifted against the stone wall, dampness seeping through his shirt. The cell smelled of earth and old iron. No light reached this deep. Time became impossible to measure in total darkness. He estimated by hunger, stiffness, and fatigue. Not yet midnight, perhaps 10 or 11 hours since the examination ended. He thought of Ely Turner's testimony. The young man had not invented the lies. Someone coached him, gave exact phrases designed to trigger legal processes, coordinated rebellion, lists of names, widespread insurrection, each term precise in Louisiana law, each narrowing the path to execution. Eli had been terrified. Isaiah recognized true fear. The assistant had not wanted to speak those words. Survival demanded compliance, and survival outweighed conscience when freedom or life hung in the balance. Isaiah did not blame him. The system forced these choices deliberately, making people betray or perish. Anger at Eli would waste energy. The question was what could still be done from inside this cell. He ran through options methodically. Escape was impossible. Iron door, multiple locks, guards above. Legal appeal was closed. The examination bypassed normal procedure, replacing trial with executive classification. Outside help seemed unlikely. No one with power would intervene for an enslaved man accused of rebellion. Every conventional path led to execution, probably within days. But Isaiah no longer thought conventionally. He traced his fingers along the stone floor, feeling grooves worn by water and time. This courthouse foundation was old, built before Louisiana statehood by enslaved hands using methods he knew well. He had not built this structure, but he understood its bones. More importantly, he knew something the county officials did not. 3 weeks ago, before the fire, before the arrest, before any of this started, Isaiah had taken certain precautions, small choices that looked unimportant when they were made. Steps taken not from fear or wild suspicion, but from a clear understanding that power always demanded a record. He had kept records, not the official plantation books that burned with Harrow's grand house. These were other records, private ones, gathered slowly over many months, copied with care during rare moments when he was alone, written in his own hand with scraps of paper and ink he had found and hidden. Lists of sales, names of families torn apart, dates when punishments were given, prices placed on human lives in Edmund Harrow's own calculations, proof, detailed, exact, impossible to deny. Isaiah had wrapped those papers in oilcloth and handed them to a river pilot named Jacob Morris 3 weeks before the horses died. Morris owed Isaiah a heavy debt from long ago, a favor repaid in silence, one that could never be spoken of openly. The pilot agreed to carry the bundle north without asking a single question, to deliver it to a certain address in Cincinnati that Isaiah had memorized from abolitionist newspapers old Ben sometimes managed to bring. The Philanthropist, an anti-slavery paper that printed often, read widely in free states, and sometimes reprinted by friendly presses farther east. Isaiah added a short letter, unsigned, but filled with enough clear detail to prove the documents were real. He described the organized cruelty of Harrow Plantation, the money systems that kept it running, the exact ways enslaved families were broken through planned separation and sale. He did not expect fast results. Abolitionist newspapers moved slowly. Sources had to be checked. Type had to be set. Copies had to be sent out. Even under the best conditions, printing would take weeks. But he was counting on something else. If his own position collapsed, if he faced death with no defense, those records could still speak. Evidence that lived beyond him, lasting longer than the system's effort to erase him completely. 3 weeks ago felt like another lifetime now, sitting in total darkness. Still, if his timing had been right, if Morris had delivered the package on schedule, if the editors had worked with urgency, then publication was close. Isaiah breathed slowly, forcing his thoughts to stay sharp. Hope was risky. Waiting for rescue was foolish. But he had learned long ago that organized power feared exposure more than open rebellion. Violence could be crushed, revolts could be broken. But written proof, spread widely and carefully, created trouble that rope and iron could not solve. They could execute him without noise. They could bury him with no marker. They could remove his name from every official book. They could not erase what had already been printed. Time passed in the dark. Isaiah drifted in and out of thin, restless sleep. His body demanded rest, but his mind refused to give it. He heard rats scratching inside the walls, water dripping in a steady rhythm. Far off thunder hinting at rain somewhere beyond the stone. Slowly, almost without notice, the darkness changed. Not light exactly, but the sense that morning was coming, leaking through cracks in the foundation above. Gray replaced deep black. Isaiah pushed himself upright, his joints aching. His mouth was dry. No water had been brought since the afternoon before. The thirst sharpened everything, making the waiting heavier. Footsteps sounded above him, several pairs moving fast. Not the slow pattern of guards dueling shifts. This was hurried. Voices followed, muffled but tense. Then boots rushed down the stairs, the iron door unlocked. Sheriff Ridley appeared, holding a folded newspaper. His face showed anger mixed with calculation. Deputy Clerk Edwin Lowe stood behind him with 2 guards. Ridley did not step into the cell. He only raised the paper so Isaiah could see the bold headline on the front page. Louisiana plantation records reveal systematic cruelty. Below it, smaller print explained that documents obtained by the press detailed years of family separation, physical punishment, and economic abuse at Harrow Estate. Ridley's voice was tight. This arrived in the Morning Post. Same edition ran in 3 northern papers at once. Reprints expected in Boston and Philadelphia by the end of the week. Isaiah said nothing. His face stayed calm, but something changed behind his eyes. The documents are verified. Ridley went on. Signatures match plantation records. Numbers line up with known sales. Everything checks out. He lowered the paper. Did you arrange this? Isaiah met his stare without flinching. I kept my own records. When? Before. Before what? Before I became too dangerous to keep alive. Ridley's jaw tightened. Behind him, Lowe whispered urgently. The sheriff silenced him with a wave of his hand. The county prosecutor got a telegraph an hour ago. Ridley said carefully. Abolitionist legal groups are watching this case. They're threatening formal complaints if an execution happens without a proper trial. Isaiah remained quiet. You understand what you've done? Ridley asked, his voice lower now. You've made yourself untouchable in the worst possible way. We can't kill you quietly anymore, but we also can't let you go. I never asked to be free. Then what do you want? Isaiah thought about it. What he wanted was consequence that could not be undone. What he wanted was for the system to be forced to face itself in public record. What he wanted was certainty that even if they killed him tomorrow, the truth would remain. He already had that. I want the truth to stay printed, Isaiah said. Ridley looked at him for a long time. Then he turned and walked back up the stairs without another word. The cell door stayed open. Morning broke fully over the parish courthouse. Sunlight poured through the east windows, lighting dust, legal papers, and the folded newspaper lying on the clerk's desk. Inside it, set in careful columns, Isaiah Crow's quiet accounting waited for readers. Before noon, the courthouse yard filled with men. Edmund Harrow arrived first, riding hard from what was left of his land, his face red with effort and rage. 3 other plantation owners followed, their expressions tight and furious. County Prosecutor James Whitfield came out of his office unwillingly, papers clutched in both hands, looking like a man walking toward disaster. Sheriff Ridley stood on the courthouse steps, blocking the entrance. The execution order stands, Harrow said sharply. The order is under review, Ridley answered. Review, Harrow shouted. By whose authority? Whitfield stepped forward, choosing his words with care. Several abolitionist legal societies have filed formal complaints with the territorial governor. They're pointing out irregular procedure. No defense counsel, no proper trial, immediate judgment with no appeal. Hayes, property. Harrow snapped. Property doesn't get lawyers. Perhaps, Whitfield said evenly. But northern papers are calling it a lynching dressed up as law. They're comparing Louisiana courts to vigilante justice. The planters muttered. One of them, a thin river landowner named Carlyle, spoke up. Hang him anyway, let them complain, and invite federal marshals within a month. Whitfield shook his head. The documents he released are real. They show violations of even the basic protections enslaved people are supposed to have under state law. If we make him a martyr, they'll use it to push for intervention. So what do you suggest? Harrow demanded. Let him walk free. Another planter scoffed. No, Whitfield said. He glanced at Ridley, who nodded once. We sell him farther south, Mississippi or Alabama. Remove him from Louisiana entirely. Silence fell. Sell him, Harrow repeated slowly. For how much and who gets paid? The county takes first claim for costs, Whitfield said. The rest goes to you as compensation. Private sale. No auction, no attention. He vanishes into cotton fields where abolitionist papers don't reach. One planter laughed bitterly. So he burns a plantation and gets sold instead of hanged. He gets sold to worse masters, Ridley said quietly. Mississippi work gangs don't keep educated slaves alive. He'll be dead within a year and not our problem. Harrow's hands clenched and released. He wanted blood. He wanted a public rope. But he understood the limits now. He stood without a word. Ridley came into the doorway first, followed by two guards carrying new chains. Not the simple wrist shackles from before, but full transport restraints. An iron collar, wrist cuffs linked by a short chain to a waist ring, ankle shackles that made every step slow and deliberate. You're being sold, Ridley said plainly. Mississippi broker waiting at the dock. You leave in 30 minutes. Isaiah let them fasten the restraints without struggling. The iron collar pressed heavily against his collarbones, its weight familiar from years gone by. The guards moved with practiced efficiency, checking every lock twice to ensure there was no chance of escape during the journey. Where in Mississippi? Isaiah asked. Does it matter? Ridley's eyes narrowed. No. He studied Isaiah for a moment. You knew this could happen. That's why you sent those records north. Insurance against execution. Isaiah said nothing. You think you've won something, Ridley continued. But you'll be working cotton for men who'll make Edmund Harrow seem merciful. You'll die there, and no one will write papers about it. I know. Then why? Isaiah met his gaze without flinching. Because the truth stays written. They walked him through the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. Townspeople lined the streets, some shouting insults, others watching silently. Isaiah moved steadily, the ankle chain slowing him, but his head stayed high, his face calm. The river dock was 2 blocks away, busy with the clamor of afternoon activity, flatboats and keelboats pressed against the wooden pilings, cargo being loaded and unloaded without pause. Workers shouted, pulleys squeaked, barrels rolled across sun-worn planks. A Mississippi broker named Talbot waited near a mid-sized cargo vessel, his paperwork ready. He barely looked at Isaiah before signing the transfer papers and accepting the bank draft from Whitfield. Load him, Talbot ordered. The men led Isaiah up the gangplank onto the boat. Other cargo lay in the hold, cotton bales, barrels, machinery parts. Isaiah was chained to an iron ring bolted near the stern, positioned where he could be watched, yet away from the valuable goods. The boat's captain checked the manifest, gave orders, and the lines were cast off. The vessel drifted from the dock, the current catching it immediately, carrying it downriver toward the wider Mississippi. The courthouse grew smaller, then vanished as the river curved south. Isaiah leaned against the gunwale, watching the brown water slip past. The chains were heavy but manageable. The sun warmed his shoulders. Ahead, Mississippi and cotton fields waited, and work that could kill him within months. Behind him, in parish offices and northern newspaper archives, his careful accounting remained recorded, verified, published. The system had tried to silence him with execution. Instead, it had sold him. That meant the evidence had worked. Isaiah closed his eyes, letting the boat rock beneath him, allowing himself a small measure of peace. 7 years passed. Spring of 1846 brought warm rain to what had been Harrow Plantation. Water filled the foundation where the main house once stood. Moss thickened over blackened stones, ignored by all. Fields had gone wild. Cotton rows long swallowed by grass and saplings. The old slave quarters sat empty, doors crooked on rusted hinges, roofs caving inward from years of neglect. Edmund Harrow had tried rebuilding for 18 months after the fire. But the published records, Isaiah's careful accounting of every violation, every cruelty, had drawn scrutiny that dried up credit. Northern banks refused loans. Local factors demanded cash he couldn't provide. The remaining enslaved people he owned had been seized and sold for debt. By late 1847, Harrow himself vanished. Some said Texas, others claimed New Orleans, dead from drink. No one knew and no one cared. The land sat abandoned, tangled in legal claims, too notorious to buy, too valuable to leave alone. So it waited, growing wild, slowly erasing the past. Sarah Crow walked along the old property line one Tuesday morning, a cloth bundle tucked under her arm. She was 53, hair mostly gray under a faded scarf, hands gnarled from years of work. But she walked freely, lived freely, with papers signed by a sympathetic magistrate in 1848 after abolitionist pressure forced Louisiana to review disputed ownership claims. She crossed the old main road onto a small tract of cleared land, 5 acres, surveyed, registered, deeded to 3 formerly enslaved families who pooled resources to buy it outright. Soil decent, water table steady. Modest cabins stood, vegetables planted. A small cotton plot, chickens and 2 goats tended. Old Ben sat on a porch step outside the nearest cabin, Bible open on his knees. Past 70, half blind, still preaching to whoever listened. He looked up as Sarah approached, his weathered face cracking a smile. "Morning, Sarah." "Morning, Ben." She held up the bundle. "Brought thread and needles." Mary's boy tore his shirt again. "That child destroys everything he touches, grows too fast," Ben said, shifting on the step to make room. Sarah sat, placing the bundle carefully. "How's the planting?" "Slow, but yields. Hard in spots, but it grows. Slow work for old hands, but it yields." They sat in quiet, listening to chickens scratch and children's laughter behind the cabin, feet pounding dirt without fear. "You think about him?" Ben asked softly. Sarah didn't need to clarify. "Think he's still alive?" "No," she said plainly. "Mississippi cotton fields don't keep men like Isaiah alive long." "Then why did he do it?" She looked across at the abandoned Harrow land, wilderness reclaiming what slavery had built. "Because burning it down wasn't enough. He needed it to stay down." Ben nodded, understanding. "The fire destroyed property, the records destroyed legitimacy. One is dramatic, the other permanent." "Those newspapers still mention him sometimes," Ben said. "Saw one last month, called him a martyr." "He wasn't a martyr. Martyrs die for principle. Isaiah died to make sure the consequences lasted. That different." "Yes." Sarah stood, picking up the bundle. "Martyrs inspire." Isaiah calculated. "No poetry, only arithmetic. He added up what the system cost us, made sure they paid in ways that couldn't be hidden or forgiven or forgotten." She walked to the cabin where Mary hung laundry between 2 posts. The younger woman waved. "Thanks for the thread." Sarah helped pin shirts and pants, chatting about recipes, weather, and whose turn it was to watch the goats. Later, after dinner and dishes were done, Sarah walked home to her small house 2 miles away. She'd purchased it with savings from washing work and a small settlement the parish was forced to provide. 1 room, sturdy walls, a lock she alone controlled. Passing other small properties, she saw families who had survived, bought land, or negotiated tenancy. Not many, but more than if the system had gone on uninterrupted. The sun was setting when she reached her door. She unlocked it, lit a lamp, sat at her small table near the window. In fading light, she could just see the distant tree line marking Harrow land. No one would rebuild there. The ground was poisoned legally and historically. Eventually, someone might clear the title and divide it, but Harrow Plantation would never rise again. The name died with Isaiah's records, the scrutiny they invited, and the system's dismantling. Sarah touched the table edge smooth beneath her fingers. Isaiah had made this table 15 years ago, before the fire, the trial, before Mississippi. His hands measured, cut, and sanded the wood level and true. She didn't pray for his soul, romanticize his choices, or pretend his actions were anything other than deliberate destruction. Yet she lived free because he refused to simply burn and run. She owned property because his records forced review. She locked her door because the system he exposed couldn't rebuild quietly. That was enough. Outside, darkness blanketed the abandoned plantation. No lights, no voices, just empty fields returning to wild, and the quiet of families who survived long enough to call the land theirs. Justice without applause, consequence without celebration. Isaiah Crow's true legacy. Not his freedom, but fractures too deep to repair. Sarah extinguished the lamp, lay down to sleep in her own house, on her own land, under her own roof. The night was still. The ground was hers. I hope you felt the weight of this story. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I've handpicked 2 even more powerful stories for you. Have a wonderful day. How soon? He asked. Today, Whitfield replied. A broker is already at the river dock. Custody transfers immediately. Papers filed before sunset. Harrow spat into the dirt and turned away. Get him out of my sight. Isaiah heard them coming down the stairs as he sat still in the open cell. 3 sets of footsteps moving fast, carrying him toward a future already shaped by words that could no longer be taken back.